Now we know how to dimension our sketch entities, but there are more ways that we can control those sketch entities inside of our sketching environment. Again, let's start by creating a new sketch on the top plane. Now this time, instead of adding dimensions, we want to add a few relations. I'm going to start by creating a line. This line is going to start at the origin and it's going to go up vertically. I'm going to double click to end that line tool, and I'm going to go back to the origin and draw a line up and to the right. Now I'm going to hit the escape key and I want to take a look at these two lines. This line is black, but its endpoint is underdefined. If I select the line, it's because it has a vertical relation. Now this vertical relation is locking it in the vertical direction, so it really means that the only thing that can help define it is a length value. This line to the right has a coincident relation with the origin and the bottom point of that other line, but it has no other relation that's locking it into any orientation. You'll notice that when we select a line, over in the left-hand side under our properties, it shows the relations that we can select. If we hold down the Control key and make multiple selections, you notice that it gives us a whole host of other options. We still have the horizontal, vertical option, but now we have collinear, perpendicular, parallel, and equal. So these are very handy options that SolidWorks gives you based on your selection. I also want to show you that if we select these in the window, that these options show up here as well. Because I selected the midpoint of my line, the only option I have is to make it fixed. If I select the line itself, I can make it horizontal, vertical, or make it fixed. And if I select this line and this line, I get all my other options: horizontal, vertical, collinear, perpendicular, parallel, and equal, as well as fixed. Let's take a look at the perpendicular option. Now we can make these two lines perpendicular, and we can have that relation without having to add any dimensions. We can also select both of them and use the equal relation to make them both the same length. Now you can see we can drag them out, and as one gets longer, the other gets longer as well. Let's select the vertical line, select the relation that's the vertical relation, and hit the delete key. Now this relation is gone. These two lines are free to move about. Now as they move about, they're still keeping the perpendicular relation between the two, and their lengths are changing together, but there's no relation that's keeping either one of them vertical or horizontal. Now, this can be a great way to create geometry without having to add a bunch of dimensions. Now, if you don't have these relations, then in the past you'd have to create a 90-degree dimension between them. You'd have to make this one a certain length and this one a certain length. But now we can go ahead and add a dimension, make it ordinate, 100 millimeters. Now both length values are fixed. Now only their orientation in 3D space needs to be controlled. Let's go ahead and make this line vertical. And now we have a fully defined sketch, and that's using a single dimension. We could finish this off using the line tool to create a triangle, and now we have a closed profile. Let's take a look at some other ways that relations can be very handy. Let's delete these entities by mask selecting them, hitting the delete key. I'm going to start by drawing a circle at the origin. I'm going to give it a dimension value. Let's draw another circle, give it a value of 200. Now this is something I've seen quite a bit in the past. People want to create segments in this circle, and they need to intersect the origin, but they don't know how to exactly do it. Now SolidWorks has some great options. Now if we draw a line from the origin out to these quadrant points, we can use the trim tool to get rid of segments. Go ahead and do that over here as well. Now the trim tool allows us to get rid of some geometry. And you notice that this line here has a vertical relation. Let's go ahead and delete that vertical relation and see what happens. You notice that its endpoints also have vertical relation with the origin. But now if I drag this line around, you can see that it just sort of moves around these circles until it gets to an endpoint. Now this line here does the same thing. Now using these relations, we can select this line, control select the origin, and we can make them coincident. Now that doesn't necessarily mean that they touch, it just means that if this line were extended, it would hit the origin. We can do the same thing with this vertical line. Let's go ahead and make it coincident, and because this line isn't actually vertical anymore, I can drag it all the way around this circle. I can then use my trim tool again, get rid of some of this, and then I'm free to drag these entities around and create my segment of this circle. Now all I have to do is create some dimensions. I can make a vertical relation here, and I can either add an angle dimension between these two, or I can control the length of the arc, and now I have a fully defined sketch. So this is a great way for us to do things like create a fully defined sketch without having too many dimensions in our sketch. One thing you'll notice when you start to use SolidWorks is that if you create very complicated sketches that have lots of dimensions driving them, one, they won't update properly. You'll have to go in and manually control all of those dimensions. And two, it'll be very hard to see through all of the dimensions. Of course, you can show and hide things, but in general, you want to keep all those dimensions on so you know what's changing. It's very important that you understand sketch relations and that you know how to use them and understand how they update your sketches. Now, so far, we've taken a look at adding sketch relations and dimensions from more conventional methods. We've used the Quick Context pop-up menu as well as the properties in the left-hand side to add our different relations. There's also an option up here that says Display Delete Relations. If we use the drop-down, you'll notice that it also has an Add Relations option. If we select that, you have to go through the same process and select sketch entities, and it'll tell you what available relations you can add. There's one more thing that this Add Relations drop-down has. If we delete some of these dimensions and we make our sketch underdefined, so you'll notice that this end is now underdefined. If we go to this Display Delete Relations dropdown, we now have an option to fully define sketch. You have the option inside here to determine whether you want to add relations or dimensions or both. In this case, let's hide the dimensions and we only want to add relations. You can also determine which of these you want to add. For instance, if you only want to add a relation that is horizontal, vertical, or collinear, you can turn off all of the rest of them. Now, in this case, let's go ahead and allow it to add any of these relations, and we're going to select Calculate. So you can see that it tells us that it's complete, but the sketch is still underdefined, because it couldn't find any relations that it could add to make this fully defined. Let's see other ways that we can use this option. Let's go ahead and delete these sketch entities, sketch a few more lines. Let's start by creating a vertical line from the origin, drag a horizontal line out to the right, and then we'll add another line. So currently we have 3 lines. Let's add a few smart dimensions. We're going to make this 50 millimeters wide. We'll make this 125 tall. So now this line to the right can move around, its length can change, and its angle can change. Let's go ahead and use that fully defined sketch option. We're going to allow it to select all entities in the sketch, and we only want it to add relations. Let's go ahead and make sure that it has all of them, and let's calculate. It couldn't find any relations to add to make this sketch fully defined. And that's because it doesn't know what we want to do with this line. If we select dimensions, we can say calculate, and it's automatically going to place a few dimensions for us. You'll notice that it gave us a vertical and a horizontal dimension. Now, we already know that we can use sketch relations and sketch dimensions to define this much easier. Let's go and delete what SolidWorks did, and let's add our own relations. Now, as we're looking at these 2 lines, we want to make this endpoint fall in the same height position as the 125 millimeter line, regardless of its angle. You notice that as we move it around, as it gets close to that point, it actually snaps to it. And you'll notice that to the bottom right of my cursor, it shows a horizontal relation icon. Now, it doesn't automatically apply this, it gets it close and it tells us what relation is there. If we control select both endpoints, we can make a horizontal relation between the 2. Now, this point can no longer go up and down, it can only move left and right. We can do things like make these 2 lines parallel or add a perpendicular relation between these 2 lines, and now we have a fully defined sketch. Now, because this is a basic intro, I don't have the ability to cover every aspect, every relation that you would ever come across. The important thing to note is that depending on your selection, make note of the Quick Context menu as well as the Properties section to see what available relations you have. Make sure that you can add as many relations as possible and limit your dimensions to only defining characteristics that you need inside your sketch. For instance, lines that have to be equal length, don't add a bunch of dimensions to define those as the same length. Otherwise, it's going to be very hard for you to update the sketch later. So now we have an understanding on how we can apply dimensions and relations to help define our sketches.